This video is on section 3 of chapter 3, and here we're going to bring the demand curve and the supply curve together. This will allow us to see what determines the price of something. So here we have the intersection of the two curves, right? It occurs when the price is $6 and the quantity is 25. So one thing you can do is just remember that where these curves intersect is the equilibrium. But it's also important for you to appreciate why it's in equilibrium. It turns out that if demand looks like this and supply looks like this, and the consumers and producers are free to trade with each other, a price of $6 is what will end up happening, and a price of $25, a quantity of 25 units exchanged will end up what we'll see. And so why is that? Well, to see how markets equilibrate, consider this figure here. Here we have a price above equilibrium, say $8. The price is $8. How much quantity is being demanded? We can say, by looking at where the price intersects the demand curve, the answer is 15 million. And what quantity do producers want to supply? 35. So here we have the quantity supplied. So we have 35 million units being supplied, but only 15 million units being demanded. So we call this a surplus, right? And that's illustrated here. When the price is $8, we have a surplus of 20 million units. When you go to a store and they have a big surplus of something, what do they usually do? Put a sale, right? So likewise, when you have a surplus in the market, the firms are going to want to get rid of that, so they're going to lower their price. When they lower their price, as price falls, consumers increase the quantity they want to buy, right? Quantity demanded increases. Likewise, when the price falls, fewer sellers want to sell it, and eventually we end up at the equilibrium point. So in other words, when the price is above equilibrium, sellers are going to undercut each other in order to get rid of the surplus. That's going to place downward pressure on price. And this undercutting will stop once we get to the equilibrium. Now, what about the alternative situation where price is not above equilibrium, but below equilibrium? Well, that's illustrated here in figure 3.16. So if the price is $4, what is the quantity demanded? So here's how you determine that. You start at $4 and you go over until you hit the demand curve. Well, we hit it right here. And so we see that that is 35 million. And what's the quantity supplied? Well, that's right here. That's 15 million. So consumers demand a quantity of 35, but producers are only supplying 15. So what's going to happen? There's a shortage. Not all of the consumers who want to purchase the good are able to find it. So what happens? They bid up the price, right? So they're going to bid up the price. While they do that, that encourages more sellers to get in the market. And also, it encourages some buyers to leave the market until we get to the equilibrium where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. And so then, in other words, when there is a shortage, there's upward pressure on price, and that comes from the buyers who are trying to outbid each other to get one of the scarce units, and that causes the price to rise until we get to the equilibrium. So, like I said before, you can just memorize that the equilibrium occurs where the demand and supply curves intersect. But I think it's better to understand the forces in the economy that propel a market to an equilibrium. And those forces are sellers undercutting each other when the price is too high, and buyers outbidding each other when the price is too low. Okay, so that is how markets get to equilibrium. But let's say something happens to demand or supply. So this is an example of this type of analysis. The type of analysis that we'll do now is what economists call comparative statics. So we're going to compare two states of the world. The first state of the world, we have D1 and S1. All right? And the equilibrium price was $6, and equilibrium quantity was $25. But then something happened to demand. Preferences changed. More people wanted to buy coffee, maybe. And there's a new demand curve, D2. Now, if the price remained $6, and then demand shifted, what would happen? Let's consider that. So the price remains $6, but demand shifts from D1 to D2. Okay, what is the quantity demanded after the shift at a price of $6? Very good, 35. You see that here. But what's the quantity supplied at $6? Still 25. So nothing's happened to supply, right? So if the price stays $6, the quantity supplied is 25, but the quantity demanded is 35. So what's going to happen? Buyers are going to bid up the price to get one of the scarce units, right? We have what? A surplus or a shortage? Shortage. Buyers are going to bid up the price. When is that bidding up going to stop? When the price is at equilibrium of $7. Very good. So this is the process that, this is what happens. So really you can think about it like we're starting off at point A. Then demand shifts, and we have a shortage. Then buyers bid up the price, and then finally we get to point B. So that is an explanation of, this is kind of the story that gets us from A to B. And it's important to keep this process in mind. But I think you're going to get pretty comfortable with being able to identify equilibrium points with where the curves intersect. Right? So you'll just say, okay, we go from A to B. And you can think about this process, or this adjustment process, as being instantaneous. Right? As soon as the demand curve shifts, buyers immediately start outbidding each other, and we immediately go to point B. Or maybe there's a little bit of a lag there. Whatever you want to assume is fine, but that's how it works. Now, what about over here in panel B? Here we have demand falling. So again, we're going to move from this equilibrium point to this equilibrium point. What if the price remained at $6 and the demand curve fell? Well, what would happen is the quantity supplied would be 25 and the quantity demanded would be 15. So then there's going to be downward pressure on price, right? Until the price falls to the new equilibrium of 5. This figure also shows supply shifts. It happens the exact same way, right? Now here are the supply shifts. And what might cause supply to shift to the right?
Factors of production.
Factors of production become what? Cheaper or more expensive? Cheaper, right. Because before we were willing to supply 20 million pounds at a price of $5. But afterwards we're willing to supply a larger quantity. So it must be that it's getting easier to produce the coffee, right? Sometimes people think about this as a shift downwards, right? You might say, oh, the curve is actually shifting down, right? But I would say don't think about it that way. Better to think about it as a shift to the right. It's possible to think about it as a shift downward, but it's not really, it could be misleading. Because actually supply is increasing, right? Technically, it's a shift to the southeast, right? And likewise here, this is a shift to the northwest. But I think it's better if you just think about it as a shift right or a shift left. Yeah?
Isn't it the same time just a shift to the left, not to the left?
Well, you know, you're actually going in this direction, right? So it's northwest. You could call it up, but that tends to be confusing because it's actually a reduction in supply. So I try to discourage people from referring to it as a shift up. It's also possible that two curves shift at the same time. This is more complicated, but only slightly. So why don't we start by considering panel A. What's going on here? Well, you can tell that demand is falling and so is supply. And how can you tell that? Well, the initial curve is always D1, and then the new curve or the subsequent curve is D2, and likewise S1 is an initial and S2 is the subsequent. So one thing that you can do is just look at the points where they intersect before and after. You can also imagine that it goes in sequence. That first demand falls. So first we go from D1 to D2, but supply remains the same. In that case, we would go from this point to, let me just draw this D2 a little bit better because it doesn't extend quite as far enough. So we go from D1 to D2. That would mean we go from this point to this point. But then, if supply shifts from S1 to S2, and I'm kind of, I am a little bit doing what I said not to do. Let's have it shift left. So then supply shifts left. We're going to go from this point to this point. So at the end of the day, we go from point A to point B, right? But if demand happens to be the first one to shift, first we go from here to here, and then supply shifts, we go from here to here. If they shift at exactly the same moment, then we just go from here to here. And of course, there's an adjustment process that I could explain, but for the sake of brevity, I will just assume that everyone's comfortable with equilibriums being at the points of intersection. In panel B, what we have is again, we have demand falling and supply falling. Right, right. So the issue here is both of these show the same thing, a decrease in both demand and supply. What we also notice is the equilibrium quantity falls in both of them, right? So if both demand and supply fall, we know that unambiguously equilibrium quantity will fall. But do we know what will happen to the equilibrium price? The answer is no, we do not. Because if both demand and supply fall, price can go up or down. And so it depends on which curve shifts more, demand or supply. So here, price has gone down, right? And why is that? That's because demand shifted by more. Right? So when demand falls, that causes price to fall. And supply fell, that causes price to rise. However, supply didn't fall by as much as demand fell, so actually price actually fell overall here. Here it's the opposite. Demand fell, that caused the price to fall, but then supply fell by even more, and then that caused the price to rise. So here we end up with a higher price. In general, here is a table that will show you the effects on prices and quantity when both curves shift at the same time. So here we have, in the top left corner, we have a decrease in supply and a decrease in demand. This is what we just considered. Again, we don't know what's going to happen to the price. It depends on the relative magnitude of the two shifts. But we can unambiguously say that equilibrium quantity is going to go down. If supply increases and demand falls, then we know that price is going to fall, but we don't know what's going to happen to quantity. And why is that? Well, an increase in supply causes price to fall by itself. And by itself, a decrease in demand also causes price to fall. So both of these forces are causing price to fall. They work together. But here they're working in opposite directions, right? Because the increase in supply causes quantity to increase, equilibrium quantity to increase. But the fall in demand is working to make equilibrium quantity decrease. So again, whether this increases, quantity increases or decreases depends on the relative magnitude of the two shifts. And similar logic works for these two options in the bottom row as well. This circular flow model is not a model of demand or supply, but rather it's a model of the economy. And it appears in every Principles of Economics textbook. So here's what we have. We have two main actors in the economy, firms and households. These two main actors interact in two different types of markets, product markets and factor markets. And so product markets are things like coffee, blue jeans, haircuts. You could say finished goods and services that households consume. On the other hand, factor markets are, for example, labor markets, where we buy and sell labor. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Which side of the market, demand or supply, do households appear in product markets? So for example, in the market for haircuts, are households demanders or suppliers? Demanders, right? And who are the suppliers? The firms, right? So Levi's supplies blue jeans, and households consume blue jeans. But when we're in factor markets, it's exactly the opposite. Because who is the demander in a labor market? Firms, right? Firms demand workers. And households supply labor, right? So a household can be either a consumer or a producer. In the labor market, they're a producer. And so you can think about it like the household goes to work during the day, sells their labor, and then they bring home money. This is this green line. So they're taking their labor to the market, that's a factor of production, and then they're bringing home money. But when they go to product markets, they don't bring their labor, they bring their money. And they take home goods and services. Exactly the opposite for firms. They take money to the factor market, and then they bring home workers. I shouldn't say home. I should say back to their factory, they take workers. They take goods and services to the product markets to sell, and then they bring home money. Again, not home. They bring back to their corporate headquarters the money, right? So this is a simple model of the economy, and we just put these demand and supply curves to suggest that these are the types of markets that we envision them interacting in. One way you can envision this is a model of the macroeconomy, right? The entire economy. And then what we study in this class, because it's a microeconomics class, are the individual markets. Another way to conceptualize microeconomics and macroeconomics. So this last case in point is good in the following sense. It's the first one we've seen that actually contains a supply and demand diagram. And you'll recall that for your writing assignment, you're required to put figures in each of the 3 case in point articles you write. And so this is an example of one that does have a demand and supply curve. This is the type of curve that you should put in your case in point article and see how they explained it in the case that they used.